Albert Breer joining us back here on the Rich Eisen Show, but for the first time as a member of the MMQB.com, joining us here on the program. How are you, Albert?
I'm doing great, Rich. You?
I'm great. We were talking just moments ago with, hearing Manning from the Manning Passing Academy as a now fan of the NFL, and he's going to be rooting for about 9 different teams because he used to play with, or he's got friends on coaching staffs all over the league. And we're just wondering what the next rivalry at the quarterback position is in the NFL now that Brady v. Manning is done. Where do you sit on that subject?
It's a great question because I don't think we've ever had one quite like it, where the two guys play year after year after year. So, I mean, it would take sustained success from 2 teams and quarterbacks leading those 2 teams. And, I mean, to be honest with you, Rich, you can't find too many guys who are in their mid to late 20s that you're sure about at this point. And so, I mean, I guess you could pit Andrew Luck against one of the guys in his division. Maybe it's Blake Bortles. Maybe it's Marcus Mariota. Maybe it's Derek Carr, in Oakland. You go over to the NFC, and, I mean, Russell Wilson against who? Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, maybe? It's hard to find a couple guys who are young that have got that kind of mileage left where they could build up something like Brady and Manning.
Yeah, Russell versus Cam is where I went on that one because
that's a good one. Yeah, because they both look like teams that could sustain success. So that might be the best one. I mean, I would go either that or Luck against whoever emerges of the young quarterbacks in the AFC, and Mariota and Bortles are right there in the division.
Yeah, I know you, Brockman. You said Luck, Ben, but those guys are at the. Are different eras, if you will. Could you even say that? I know Ben is not like a gray beard, but Ben has been around.
He's in the Rivers Eli era.
And Luck is a young gun. Right. I mean, you got to.
Yeah, I guess Ben's what, 34, right? Like Ben, or 33, maybe.
Yeah, Luck and Carr is pretty good.
Luck versus Carr. Well, I mean, the Raider fans would sign up for that right now. And I saw your new boss Peter King today in his MMQB say that he's high on the Raiders and he's thinking, as he put it. He's thinking of overvaluing them in the preseason, which I laughed out loud at. That's going to be a bandwagon team, right, Albert? The Raiders this year?
Well, I think it's one of those teams that's an easy team to pick because you look at the top of their roster. I don't know that you can find another team in the league with 3 guys that are young, talented, and play pivotal positions. And I'm talking about Derek Carr, Khalil Mack, and Amari Cooper. I mean, all 3 of those guys, you could envision a scenario where in 2-3 years, those guys could be top 5 players at their position. And that right there is a really promising core, and it was a long way out of the woods for Reggie McKenzie. He inherited a mess when it came to the salary cap. But they've done a nice job putting young guys in that team, and they've really nailed some of those high picks now. And so, you look at it and you say, okay, well, they don't need what so many teams are looking for is that A-level player, right? Like you need 3 or 4 A-level players to really make it in the NFL. Like look at what Carolina has with Cam and with Luke Kuechly on the defensive side of the ball. And you could argue Josh Norman or Thomas Davis was on that level. Well, Oakland, you look at them and they've got 3 guys who you legitimately look at as potential top 5 players at their position, all in their mid-20s. And so that gives you something that you certainly look at and say you could build around.
Yeah, and the other aspect of the Manning retirement as well as we're searching around for what the next quarterback rivalry could be is the void that leaves and the vacuum of leadership in the AFC West. I mean, this division now that has been Denver's for sure because of Peyton's presence is now wide open, one would think. Maybe the Raiders fill that void. This could be Phillip Rivers' time or the Chiefs. This is going to be really fascinating unless Denver just continues on with what they're doing. And that's our question with the poll today at richeisenshow.com, Albert, is which quarterback situation concerns you most? You want to give them the choices? Brockman, Albert Breer, the choices?
Yeah, we got the Jets, Broncos, 49ers, Eagles, and Browns.
Where do you sit on that situation?
Broncos, because they're in the best position to contend. And I think like you look at like the Jets and the Eagles, I mean, those are teams that could squeeze into the playoffs, but I don't think under any scenario those teams are going to be competing for championships. So, I mean, those aren't perfect quarterback situations, the other ones, but those also aren't teams that you would necessarily consider to be in a championship window, where you look at the Broncos and they are smack in the middle of the championship window. They just came off of a championship, and they've got a defense probably got, another 2 or 3 years of playing at a really elite level left in it. If you look at the age of some of the guys in that defense, the key guys, and you have to say to yourself, okay, what's going to affect who gets to Houston in February? What quarterback situation is going to affect that more than any other one? And it has to be the Broncos. If they can't get, passable play at that position, it could be, Denver in 1999 with Bubby Brister and Brian Greasy all over again. If they can be just good, not even great, just good at that position, then I think that, they've got a good shot at getting back into the playoffs. And when you've got a defense like they do, anything can happen from that point on.
And I've been saying that Fitzpatrick and the Jets, that clock won't strike midnight until the middle of the preseason, that both sides are going to be willing to roll the dice on how Geno Smith performs in the first, if not even second preseason game before a deal is struck. Would you agree with that assessment or no?
And that's Fitz. Well, I mean, I think that there's a chance, and I know the Jets have mulled this over, but there's a chance that they set a deadline and they say we have to build around Geno now. And we have to tell the players in our locker room who our quarterback is. Now, I don't think that that's out of the question. They've put a number of different proposals in front of Fitzpatrick. And, I think to me this is almost, at this point, it's about pride, in that you put, all right, here's what we think your value is. We don't think you can match that contract and the playing time we're going to give you anywhere else. And the Jets won that bet without question, right? Because he hasn't been able to find anything else like that. The problem is that when you stick to that, then you're asking the player to come back with his tail between his legs. And that's hard to do if you're a player. And so, I still think that there's a chance for the Jets to sweeten the deal a little bit here. To me, the real and they've talked about playoff incentives and everything else, and they've put a couple different options in front of them. To me, the compromise is a 1-year, $8 million deal. Now, that's the Jets number, $8 million, right? And then you say, okay, and if you hit playing time triggers, which ensures that you're actually the starter, and you make the playoffs, then that kicks up to $12 million. Because that's been the whole thing, that the narrative that's come out of the Jets building is this is a quarterback who's never been to the playoffs before. And so you get him back in at your number, and then if he is who he says he is, then he gets up to his number at $12 million. Clearly I think that there's something, they have to put some sort of sweetener in that deal, and I wouldn't put it past the Jets at this point to set some sort of deadline early in training camp so they can inform the rest of their team who the quarterback's going to be.
Albert Breer of the MMQB.com joining me here on the show. James Harrison's Instagram account was an interesting look at today, where he said that he would be willing to chat with the NFL about the Al Jazeera report, but at his house at a date of his choosing, and the commissioner has to be there. What are the odds of that happening, Albert? What do you think?
Well, and I know you've seen that the NFL declined comment on that, and then George Talla came out with a tweet after. My understanding of the situation is all of the active players, I think there are 5 of them, right? That the 5 active players, the union's not stopping them from going in and talking to the league. They're advising that should happen. The argument right now between the league and the union is the where, the when, the how, the why, all of that stuff that they normally squabble about. And so that's what's preventing the active players from going in. Of course, the one that's sitting out there is Peyton Manning and what you do with him. And, my understanding of that situation is actually a little bit different in that, I think the union would encourage him to stay away, because I think the union feels like that would set a bad precedent for other retired players. They could just yank you in whenever they want. The thing is that Manning's motivated to cooperate with the league because I think he still has designs on being an executive somewhere. And so I think he'd be willing to go in and help with information pertaining to this report. I think with the other players, it's just a question of where, when, how, and why this happens. And I think when you look at what showed up on Harrison's Instagram account there, that's a direct reference to that.
And which current player that has yet to sign their franchise tag do you think has the possibility of somehow, some way getting past July 15th and making this an in-season holdout, Albert?
As far as somebody who could actually sit games out.
Yes, sir.
I don't think any of them will, because we always hear those threats.
We do.
So we heard it with Des Bryant and Demaryius Thomas last year. I don't think any of these guys are actually going to sit out any game. But I do think there are going to be a couple of guys that are going to play on 1-year deals. To me, the most notable one would be Kirk Cousins. they've kind of resolved, both sides in that case have resolved that they're probably going to have to go forward on the 1-year tender. I think Von Miller ultimately winds up getting something done because that's been the Broncos' history. Let's look over the last few years. They got Demarius done at the deadline. They got Ryan Clady done under the franchise tag, and I think that they'll be able to get Miller done. Eric Berry's another one who I think gets a deal done. But ultimately, when you look at all of these guys, I think there's going to be huffing and puffing, and some guys could wind up sitting out parts of training camp because, remember, they don't lose any money until week 1. But I think when the games count for real and the real money starts to come into play, that weekend of September 11th, all of those guys will be playing for their teams. And
last one, Albert, as you know, I've been taking track of your career for many years, having worked together with you. Mm-hmm. And now that you're with the MMQB.com, I could not help but notice that your first feature, was it your first feature or one of the first features for you? Was to go visit?
First video piece, I think is what you're referencing.
Was it the first video? Was it the first? Was it your first piece?
I think so, yeah. The first video wasn't the first piece, but it was the first video that we did, which is going to be a big part of my job, was with your head football coach.
Yeah, well, and I think it's really America's, right? Wouldn't you say, Albert, the way that he's going around and selling the sport?
My last written piece for NFL.com was on Ohio State, so I felt like I needed
you want to be
balanced there, right?
So, but what you
probably wasn't nearly as awkward for me as sitting there on draft night was for you with Urban Meyer. Buckeye after Buckeye after Buckeye come off the board.
Now
I saw that my friend Rich Eisen was able to withstand that. Hey. And I said, I can go to Ann Arbor and do a story with Jim Harbaugh. No problem. So thanks for inspiring me with that, Rick.
You know what? I'm an inspirational figure in this business, Albert. I understand that. That goes without saying. But what did you glean from seeing things firsthand with Jim Harbaugh at the University of Michigan? What did you glean from it, Albert?
There's no question that this is going to be great for the conference, seeing those two going head-to-head. I think the thing that stuck out to me the most, and we've heard this argument over satellite camps, and I'm sure you guys talked about it on the show.
Oh, yes.
The battle between Saban and Harbaugh and everything else. Well, I'll give you the thing that stuck out to me most. Now, this was a specialized quarterback camp. There are 240 high school quarterbacks there, quarterbacks only. And so Harbaugh wants to see these guys' athletic traits. So they do things during the day. They do all kinds of quarterback stuff with Jay Cutler and with the NFL coaches they bring in. But they also test how they deal with different situations. So they play volleyball and they play dodgeball. And there was one drill right before lunch where they're sitting there and they're playing, and Don Brown, the defensive coordinator, hits a fly ball to a guy. He's got to field it. Hits a ground ball to a guy. He's got to field it. Make the throws in, and then he can go in for lunch. And Jim Harbaugh was standing there while, the entire camp was in at lunch, and there were 2 or 3 kids left. And he watches each of those guys field their fly ball, field their grounder. Then he puts the glove on himself and fields the fly ball and fields the grounder. And it was just, to me, it was such a symbol of, for all this arguing that we've done over all of this stuff, this is a guy who genuinely loves his job.
There you go.
And genuinely loves being out there. And I thought it was just such a good, we can argue till the cows come home about the pluses and minuses of satellite camp, but this is a guy who actually seemed to really enjoy being out there and doing it. And that's what he told me at the end. He was like, I said, well, what do you make all the criticism? And he's like, well, you're a coach. That's your chosen profession. That's what you choose to do. And he used the term with me. He's like a pig in slop in Michigan, and it was pretty obvious being there to see that.
Oh yeah. Did he acknowledge that you're an Ohio State guy? Was that brought up?
Yeah, I got more crap from some of his assistants about it actually, and I wish them luck for the rest of the year, except for one weekend right after Thanksgiving.
You take care, Albert. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Rich. Appreciate it.
There's Albert Breer of the MMQB.com.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.